Hello and welcome. I am Shield Bro for the History Armada, but you can call me John, and I am your guide today as we dive into our weekly dose of history. Today we are talking about something very unique and something I feel like doesn't often get enough light shed upon it. Today we are talking about the Mongol Invasion, and more importantly, we are talking its effects on world history. That's right, not just Chinese history, not just Asian history, but world history. So although the Mongol invasions initially sparked terror, disease, and led to the decimation of strongholds, it ultimately had enormous positive impacts on Chinese and world history. There are many changes and effects of the Mongol invasions and Yuan rule. These positive effects came during the period which historians call the Pax Mongolica. The Pax Mongolica is a century of peace. It lasted from roughly 1280 CE to 1360 CE. Among the neighboring territories of the Far and Middle East who were conquered by the Mongols. This period of peace allowed for the reopening of the trade routes known as the Silk Road between China and Europe. The Silk Road during this era of peace led to cultural, educational, technological, and wealth exchange through these routes. The utilizations of the so-called Silk Roads to access, implement, and adapt knowledge from other peoples our areas was fundamental in the further development of China and the world. And that's what we're going to be talking about. So a big chunk of what we're going to be talking about is the effects of Pax Mongolica and the Silk Roads. But we're also going to talk about the change in military history and social history that was brought upon by the Yuan dynasty and the Mongol rule. So here you can see the empire and campaigns of Genghis Khan from 1206 to 1227, and you can see the area and the movement of the Mongols. So many changes stemmed from this Pax Mongolica in a ripple effect of sorts. Central Asia was a region that had historically been important to overland trade between the East and West due to the Silk Roads. This connection had been lost due to different empires and periods of war. However, as the region became restabilized under the Pax Mongolica, trade became less vulnerable than it under the various previous empires. The Pax Mongolica allowed for a spread of knowledge as well as ideas to be recreated along this Silk Road. Just for a preface, I'm going to let you know I'm going to link a couple of books that I used in the description of the video so you can find some for further reading about these points that I am pulling from. The East and West had all but, for lack of a better term, forgotten about one's true extent with the loss of the initial Silk Roads. With the Pax Mongolica, however, they were reconnected and cross-cultural exchanges flowed. The Silk Road significantly built avenues of knowledge and good exchange. As these cross-cultural interactions became more and more frequent and extensive, more goods and ideas were exchanged. This was a very important factor, and an important factor of this change was the ability of Abrahamic, Oriental, and Western cultural and religious knowledge to be dispersed. The overland route known as the Silk Road witnessed a vigorous revival under the Pax Mongolica. This route is vital in the changes and development caused by the Mongol invasions and the Yuan dynasty. Its rulers actively worked to ensure the safety of the trade routes, building effective post stations and rest stops, and introducing the use of paper money and eliminating artificial trade barriers. These efforts by the Yuan and its neighbors were instrumental in the spread of goods between East and West and the impact on daily life that it had. By 1257, Chinese raw silk appeared in silk-producing areas of Italy, and in the 1330s, a single merchant sold thousands of pounds of silk in Genoa. This exchange suddenly allowed for massive cross-cultural exchanges, altering the way of life for Chinese and Europeans alike. Here you can see the Silk Road and some of its stops, all the way from Italy and Istanbul all the way to the right to Sarnath and Zayan. Within Pax Mongolica, the sharing of knowledge and cultures were encouraged and protected underneath the Khanates of the Yuan. The Yuan dynasty witnessed an influx of outsiders into Asia and China that would diversify and modify the makeup of the populace. Citizens could legally become followers of Islam, Christianity, Buddhism, Taoism, or anything else, so long as their practice did not interfere with the political ambitions of the Khan and they adhered to the tax policies. The Pax Mongolica allowed people such as monks, missionaries, traders, and explorers to travel along the trade routes. This open travel and immigration of educated men brought with them new trade and information that would impact not only China, but all of its neighbors and its neighbors. Just a domino effect of spread. The technology that these travelers would bring with them altered the course of Chinese life and boosted a stagnant scholastic mindset into new thinking. Many important ideas and technologies such as papermaking, printing, and gunpowder also made its way across Asia to the west via the Silk Road. Peoples such as merchants, explorers, pilgrims, refugees, and soldiers all brought with them their religious and cultural idea, as well as domesticated animals and plants that were transported hundreds of kilometers in this cross-continental exchange underneath the Emperor Kublai Khan and the Yuan dynasty and its subjugated areas as pictured here in 1289. The Mongolian Empire absorbed scientific knowledge from Persia, India, China, and Arabia. This was key to how the Mongols would develop and expand its bounds. The Yuan would adapt and utilize information and ideas from both the East and West in different ways. For instance, keeping an army healthy was a vital task for them, so they created hospitals and training centers to encourage the exchange and expansion of medical knowledge. As a result of this, China employed doctors from India and the Middle East, all of which was communicated to European centers as well. We also see the establishment of physician households within China and a newfound niche for the profession. There occurs a large rise in the social standings and desire for doctors in China and the East, which is a turnaround from the traditional views of the medical field that had been held until this time. The Mongol Empire witnessed efforts such as Kublai Khan, pictured here, founded an institution for the study of Western medicine, and the Persian historian Rashid al-Din published the first known book on Chinese medicine outside of China in 1313. This is important as it gave the Western world and us a better view of the Chinese social life and tactics of the medicians during this time, and it helped with a spread of their tactics and ideas. Historians argue that the Mongol Empire was the jumpstart needed for the European age of discovery as well, which is a huge claim. Europeans 2 centuries later were trying to reclaim the lucrative global trade of knowledge and ideas that was lost when the Mongol Empire collapsed. That was a claim from the historian Weatherford. The cross-cultural exchange that existed during the Pax Mongolica was essential in the progression of knowledge and culture. China and the West would be pushed to advance by this exchange, and the results would be a combination of ideas and advancement for knowledge. The Mongols harnessed the knowledge from the Far East and Middle East and created a new cross-boundary exchange as pictured here. You can see all of the goods that were traded on the Silk Road. This action was fundamental for the progression of Chinese and world development. Jack Weatherford goes on to further suggest that some of Kublai Khan's reforms in China, which localized power and gave political strength to individual farms, were the first democratic experience in China. This change of governmental styles was important in how dynasties worked and would exist within China. Weatherford also suggests that the tribal government of the Mongols had many democratic elements. He refers to Mongol leaders being selected by councilmen, or, I'm gonna butcher this, I'm so sorry, Kurulatai, as quote-unquote elections. Although these, like the Athenian or Roman versions, may be more properly called election by an elite oligarchy. In addition to this, however, Weatherford repeatedly declares that the Khans ruled through the will of the people. Although there is little significant data to actually back this, it is, however, an important observation and is highly crucial in analyzing the progression of this Chinese government under the Yuan. The Yuan dynasty attempted to break the cycle of emperors and dynasties of the Chinese emperor as the rise and fall with the Mandate of Heaven, But this was not easy for them to do, and the Mongols were trying to do away with the oligarchy and emperors, but that never actually happened. More importantly, we see the spread as shown here, and Genghis Khan also globalized the Mongol army. Now here comes a very important part of military history. Genghis Khan globalized the Mongol army by recruiting many people from outside of the Mongol army. As they conquered new land, they would adapt their soldiers, their fighting tactics, and their weapons into their army, kind of like the Borg. Genghis Khan and his army battled many empires such as the Chinese, the Russians, and the Khwarezm. I'm sorry if I butchered that as well. As Genghis Khan conquered these empires, he also used mild torture as a form of punishment, but with less severity, so that he could get information out of them about how these people fought. Genghis Khan utilized such tactics as intimidation, but also he had a certain charisma to him, and he adapted tactics that would revolutionize traditional Eastern military tactics and create a new hybrid, as we see things being created such as feigned retreat tactics pictured here. It is these combination of new fighting forms and weaponry that would really start to revolutionize how both East and West fought. And that is huge for world history with these hybrid fighting cultures being created. This is important because the Yuan were able to create a multicultural army that was in the field and able to defeat and conquer other older and stronger empires from this. This changed the face of military actions of the East and of Chinese military, and the Yuan and its predecessors were groundbreaking in their use of different peoples and their technology to combine into an unstoppable force. Genghis Khan and his creation of the Mongol military was fundamental in the progression of modern world warfare. So, Weatherford also highlights how the Mongols created new battle tactics and used unique methods to conquer the East. Mongolian armies only carried what they needed, mainly because they carried information crucial to conquering foreign armies. When traditional Mongol weapons and tactics no longer were effective when attacking cities, Genghis Khan made changes. He adopted large weapons from the Persian, Chinese, and Arabs, and developed new strategies to use them. The Mongols under Genghis Khan would adapt and utilize several strategies and weapons, such as trebuchets, into their fighting style. Weatherford summarizes this as, quote, "The Mongols devised and used weapons from the different cultures with whom they had contact, for much success," end quote. This is important to point out how they adapted because almost everything that came into contact with them, they made it theirs in some way, just as the Romans did before them. It is through this, quote, accumulation of knowledge they created a global arsenal that could be adapted to whatever situations they encountered, end quote. The Mongol alteration of military ability and tactics in China and the East is what made them successful in combat and into one of the largest land empires. They were also very culturally and religiously tolerant, but I feel like the democratic changes, the good exchanges, and the change of military tactics is what really hammered home the change in world history by the Mongols, as you can see them fighting here and choosing different tactics to face different foes, as with the Knights Templar shown here. Not Knights Templar, sorry, the Teutonic Order. That being said, they were also forced to change a lot with how that happened, and they were even adept in different styles, and that would lead to altogether a whole new existence. But I feel like an important effect of this Mongol invasion was under the Golden Horde's occupation of Eastern Europe, as shown here and here. The Empire of the Golden Horde at its greatest extent, and you can see the Empire of the Golden Horde and its Russian principalities next to it. So the reason I say this is important is because this invasion and occupation in turn would force the unification or the early unifications of the Russian principalities, because if they did not work together, they would be conquered. After the death of Batu Khan, who was the founder of the Golden Horde, in 1255, his dynasty flourished for a full century. The Golden Horde was the westernmost khanate and a dire force for Eastern Europe to deal with at the end of the medieval age. Prior to this period of Mongol rule, the Russian people were organized into a series of self-governing city-states such as Kiev and other Novgorod and other principalities and such. But The Golden Horde spread Turkish and East Asian traditions and ideals to Eastern Europe and caused a combination of many ideas in that area, which is why we have such a unique formation by the Aral Sea and the steppes of Bulgaria with the Volga River and Ural Valley. In order to reclaim control of their country and lost land, the Russian-speaking peoples of the region had to start uniting in at least some way. The Golden Horde Mongols would be an important piece of knowledge exchange between the East and West, and an answer to the Tartar nuisance that had plagued this area. In 1480, the Russians managed to defeat and expel the Mongols, but the Russian city-states would be forced to band together to expel the occupying forces of the Golden Horde. The Mongols' occupation and spread of knowledge would force the creation of the Grand Duchy of Muscovy, and this is an important factor as Russia would become a dominating force and world power for another roughly 500 years. Obviously, it wasn't Russia yet, and there was much change to come after this, but the formation and early steps forced by the Golden Horde is extremely important for European and world history. So really, in conclusion here, the Mongol invasion and subsequent Yuan dynasty's rule were vital in the advancement of Chinese development and world history. Although the immediate invasion of China and her neighbors by the Mongol Khanates was a deadly time that decimated populaces, the changes and developments that would stem from this period and control would be fundamental in development of China, Eastern European, and world history and the way they functioned. Overall, the Yuan dynasties furthered all aspects of life, including religious tolerance, rule by consensus, literacy, trade, and military change and adaptation. And that is where we're going to wrap up today's video. I know that was a lot of information and a little ranty, but I hope you enjoyed and I hope you learned something important. If you did enjoy, please make sure you hit that like button. And as always, I am Shield Bro for the History Armada, and I'll see you in the next video. Thank you so much for watching.